Hello, ladies and gentlemen, from Canyon Professional Development. Our why is to empower, educate, and inspire our community so they take action to fulfill their purpose and serve others. Today's class is called Procedures Are Your Pal. Hi, my name is Mike Blakely, and my current job is the math coach at Alhambra High School in Phoenix, Arizona. Very passionate about supporting teachers to become the best teacher possible. And in my 18 years of education, I've served as a teacher, a coach, and on the administrative side as well. Very excited to work together through this course. Some norms we have, and some of these will be applicable to this course and some will not. But we want to have open minds to challenge your thinking, very applicable to this course. Open hands for chats and polls. That's less for this one, but more for those in-person interactions. Open mouths, open camera if possible, and open hearts. So really the open mind and open hearts are ones that we're going to be using here. That I want you to challenge your thinking, and I want you to make sure that you have grace with yourself as you're doing this, because we want to make sure that our kindness leads us. Quote for the day: begin with the end in mind, by Stephen Covey. Right? That's going to relate a lot with what we're talking about today as we set up procedures for your classroom. Some objectives for today: we want to understand the process of how to set up a procedure. We want to hear some procedures that teachers have used in the past. And we want you to have a chance to create your own at the end so that you can put this directly into your classroom. Because that's the real important part behind this, that you could take what we learned today and you can put it right into your classroom. First, wanted to define procedures with you. Procedures are routines in which you do something, or in other words, just how you do things. It's not rules. Rules have consequences, but procedures are just what we do. All right, I know that I originally titled this presentation when I did it live as Procedures Over Rules. Both have places in our classrooms, both are important, but I find that the stronger your procedures are, the tighter you are with your procedures, the less you really have to worry about the rules of the classroom. For this class, decided to break procedure setting into 4 steps in the process. The first one is going to be about reflecting, then planning. That's where the procedure really comes to place, is the planning. But then how are you going to teach it? And then how do you refine it so that it continuously gets better? Going through these steps, let's first talk about the reflecting step. With the reflecting step, I want you to think about, like, what annoys you when it happens in class? Where do you feel you have wasted time? What school expectations are not being met? What transitions in your class could be made easier? What takes your attention away from teaching? So those are 5 different questions, and you could reflect on a lot of other questions as well. But usually when you're setting a procedure, there's something going on that you either don't like how the outcome is happening or you think it could be done better. So the first step that you always want to do is to reflect. Now, there's 2 handouts with this course. One of them is called the Reflection Guide, and it takes you through a process of going through reflections in a very thorough way that you could brainstorm all the things that you might want a procedure for, pick the ones that you think are the most desired, and then you can put those together into procedures and then move on with the other steps. The second step is planning. So once you've reflected, you want to pick one of those aspects from your reflection and say, how can this issue be resolved? Step by step, what do I want the students to do? And step by step, what do I want the adults to do? The third step of teaching, because just having a procedure, if everyone in the room doesn't know it, or you're the only one in the room that knows it, that procedure is not going to be used. So what do you need to demonstrate to a class? How can students and teachers practice this? And how can you get feedback from the students? Maybe you set up a procedure and students give you some great feedback about one part of that procedure that's difficult, that maybe needs to be tweaked a little bit. The last part is refining, because you'll start using a procedure and then you'll give it a certain amount of time and you might realize, like, hey, this is working perfectly. Or you may realize that it's not working, or maybe there's just a part of it that's not working. So think about some of the questions like, Did your procedure fix the issue? Is there part of the procedure that's not working? Do you need to make any tweaks to the procedure? Have you seen someone else with a procedure that can make yours even better? Teachers are great at stealing from each other. Like, to be a good teacher, you really do need to steal from other teachers. So maybe you put a procedure in place and then you see someone else do a little part. It's like, ooh, I can add that onto mine. Wanted to take you through a couple of sample scenarios. So Kevin is a teacher and he gets frustrated that every time he needs to pass out papers or supplies, that takes a lot of time. And during those times, he has more issues with student behavior. What procedure can Kevin put into place with his issue? Now, as we do this and we come up with and you see what I come up with, you might come up with something different. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just might be different for you versus me. You might hear mine and think, oh, that's great. I wish I would have thought of that. Or you might hear mine and think like, oh, mine's way better. So don't worry if we don't have the exact same thing. All right, let's start with the reflecting process. All right, so Kevin reflects, and the issue that Kevin decides he's going to work on is that he needs a way for students to get supplies and or their papers back to them without the teacher passing them out during class. All right, so Kevin probably sat down, took a couple of minutes, jotted down all the things that were frustrating, and this was the biggest one. Not to say that Kevin won't have other procedures he makes, but this is the one that was the most obnoxious to him. They're planning some possible ways that Kevin can fix the issue. First thought was he could have students pick up their supplies as they enter the classroom. He could have supplies at the desk when students enter the classroom. He could have a protocol for students picking up returned assignments, and some items can be shared electronically. So those were different things that he thought of that could help fix his issue to make it so he doesn't have to waste so much time handing things out. You might think of some other things that he didn't, but these were some of his brainstorming and planning of how things can go quicker. From there, Kevin came up with these procedures. He decided as students enter, the table by the door will have any items they need to pick up for class. Each group's going to have a pencil box filled with the routine supplies, the pens, the pencils, highlighters, and erasers, anything that students typically need during the class. All the forms of notes are going to be posted in their Google Classroom so that if a student misses, they can go and see what the note outline was at least, and then get some help to fill it in. Each student has a folder hanging on the wall to check for returned assignments while they enter daily. All right, so that one probably takes Kevin a while to set up. And it might depend on what type of teacher Kevin is. If Kevin's an elementary school teacher, he might need to have 20 folders on the wall that he needs to fill, or 30 folders, something like that. Kevin's a high school teacher. He might need to have 150 if he has 5 classes of 30 students. So either way, Kevin decided that each student's going to have a hanging folder. He's going to put returned assignments into their hanging folder so students can just pick up any assignments from there. Now Kevin has to teach the procedure. So on day 1, Kevin shows his class the locations of the material to pick up and what needs to be checked before he starts class. Each group has a checklist for their supplies, and the group leaders are identified to ensure all supplies are returned at the end of class. For 2 weeks, students are given reminders if they've forgotten to pick up supplies. For example, step 3 may look like students are in their seats, class is starting, and maybe they need a piece of paper they're supposed to pick up as they came in. Kevin might give a gentle reminder of like, hey, you needed that paper as you came in. Make sure that if you didn't get it, go ahead and get it now, or go ahead and send one member from your group to get it. And you'll probably have 3 or 4 students get up because they've forgotten to get it. But by practicing that routinely for 2 weeks, Kevin feels like students are going to catch on to that. Starting in week 3, there are no more reminders that Kevin's given. But instead of a reminder, when the student asks for something that is a procedure, he's going to say, what's the procedure for picking up supplies? So either that student can say, oh yeah, and go ahead and pick it up. Or if that student still doesn't know, they can check with their group and make sure that they know it. So he's going to teach it on the first day. For 2 weeks, he's going to give gentle reminders. We want to make sure that we have compassion with our students. Then as of week 3, it's still not the end of the world if a student forgets a procedure, but then that student's going to have to figure out the procedure. Unless the student's new to the class, because in which case they need to have a little bit more grace. After that, we refine. So Kevin decided he was going to wait 4 weeks. Then he looks at how the procedure is going. Here are some of the reflections from his class. Does not mean it's going to match up with your class, but these are some things that Kevin saw. So the pencil boxes are working and he wants to include dry erase materials in them. So that's one change he's making, is what's in the pencil boxes. Students are now trained to pick up their work and they know how to find electronic materials. So those are some positive things. Kevin finds that the folders for returned work is not working as the students do not regularly check them. He decides to return more assignments electronically. Kevin may have had those 150 folders up, and maybe he wasn't putting things in quick enough, or maybe students, as it says here, weren't checking them regularly enough. So he decided that, well, let's do assignments online so that I can just click some buttons and get them back to the students. After that, Kevin will probably wait maybe another 4 weeks, see how everything's going, and make any adjustments as he goes. All right. None of these procedures are set in stone that it has to go for the rest of the year like that, but these are good ways of getting started. Just so you know, there's also a procedure setting outline as a second handout, which takes you through all of the steps. The reflection guide takes you through an in-depth way of doing your reflection. On the procedure setting outline, the reflecting doesn't go into that much detail, but then it takes you through all the rest of the steps. So the same problem is many solutions. Do what works for you. Maybe for you, the students picking up their assignments would take precedent over the pencil boxes. All right. Maybe you came up with a way I haven't even thought of. All right. Just because someone has a procedure does not mean that's the only way it can be done. Procedures are whatever's going to make your life easier. All right. A teacher at my school has a great procedure for when students come in late. She has a laptop set up where they have to fill out a digital form so that she could adjust attendance accordingly later. So she takes her attendance later in the day, changes students from absent to tardy. All right. They use that same procedure for if they need to use the restroom. There's a different form on that same laptop. So if they need to do one of those things, then they go to the computer, they fill out the form, and then all of that is documented. It doesn't mean that every teacher wants to have that exact documentation, but that was one that I saw a teacher do. All right. Speaking of restroom, potty time. Isabella is frustrated that she has to stop class frequently for a student to ask to use the bathroom. What procedure can she put into place to help her frustration? As we go through this with each part, I want you to pause it, brainstorm what you'd do. Once again, it might not be the same as what we come up with or what I come up with, but getting multiple opportunities to think of things is great, because in your classroom, you might have the same issue and you might like what I come up with, or you might like better something that you come up with on your own. So let's have Isabella reflect. And really, we're starting in these issues after they've already done the reflection. All right, so Isabella needs a procedure so that she does not have to stop class for students to ask to use the restroom, but still allow them to use the restroom as needed. So she's already reflected, and that's what she came up with. As Isabella planned, she decided there was going to be a hand signal for using the restroom. The sign out procedures that students can do, parts of the lesson to not use the restroom. So that means, like, let's say in the middle of the direct instruction, students aren't going to be able to use the restroom during that time unless it's an emergency. There's a way of digitally getting in line and the use of restroom passes. So these are all different things that Isabella came up with as far as things that could be used. Now that she came up with all these, let's find out exactly what the procedure is she's going to use. Procedure A, if a student raises their hand with their index finger up, then they need to use the restroom. Teacher, while teaching, gives a thumbs up or thumbs down to the student on whether or not they can go. The student knows the procedure to sign out, take the pass, go to the restroom, and sign back in. So she's doing this so the class doesn't have to stop. She sees the signal, she gives a signal of whether they can go, and she can keep teaching. Procedure B. Isabella has a restroom form with a link in their Microsoft Teams page. When they need to use the restroom, they complete the form on their laptop. The form will keep track of how many people are ahead of you and when it's time to go. The form's data is used to track the time students are out of class. So there's a second possible procedure that she could have used. Now, in most classrooms, ever since the pandemic, most classrooms either have Microsoft Teams or a Google Classroom or WebEx or some way of digitally communicating with students. So This is an electronic way that she can do it. Right? So when it goes to teaching, she actually decided to use procedure B. She goes over the form the next day in class. When the students ask to use the restroom, she prompts them to use the form for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, she tells the students to ask for the procedure from a group mate. Isabella uses this for 3 weeks before she decides to refine it. Usually the procedure works fine, and she is no longer frustrated with students asking for the restroom pass. She has determined times where students should not use the restroom. She added into her form a pause button for times where students should not be able to be leaving the room. So let's say she's teaching her lesson and she decides that it's going to be a 10-minute lesson. She doesn't want anyone to miss. Then she's going to pause that form so everyone has to stay in the room. And she can unpause it when it's a good time to use the restroom again. A little self-reflection. What do you want? So I want you to pause this and go through the reflection guide and go ahead and come up with one aspect that you think you would like to change in your classroom, or if you don't have a classroom yet, one thing that you'd like to put into place before you have a classroom. So pause it, and when you're ready to come back, then go ahead and click unpause. Now for planning, step-by-step actions. Pick whatever the one aspect from your reflection guide was, and go ahead and write a procedure that addresses what's brainstormed. So I would recommend jotting down all the different things that could be done and then making a step-by-step procedure of what you'd want students to do. If it applicable, put a step-by-step procedure on what teachers need to do as well, or put the two of them all in one set for procedures. Now that you have your procedures, let's work on the teaching aspect. Come up with a plan for how you will teach these procedures to your class. How will you introduce them? How will you remind students of them? Because early on, they're going to make mistakes in the procedures more often than they're going to get them right, especially after just the first couple of days. And then when is the date where you expect mastery? And what I mean by that is, like, when's the date where you're no longer going to give the teacher reminders, but just say, like, hey, what's our procedure for that? Which either has the student remember the procedure and do it, or the student has an opportunity to check with one of their classmates if they still don't know the procedure. Now, you can't do this part today, but after you try to put it in place, that's when you'll do the refining. So somewhere after that deadline where they should have it memorized, and give it a little bit of time after that so you can see, do you have to keep asking them that question of what's the procedure, or do they really understand it? But are students using the procedure? What's working? What needs adjustments? And do I need to teach more? Maybe there's a part of it that you look back and you're like, you know what? I thought I did a good job of teaching that, but half my class doesn't really get it. So now I need to reteach that, just like you would with a concept. We're going to do a complex scenario, and this was actually something from Mr. Blakely's school, the class called advisory. This scenario is about an advisory period. The next slide has to do with creating procedures for an advisory period. An advisory period, as we used it, had students go to one class for attendance and announcements. Then if a teacher has stamped their agenda, they get to go, it's signed out to go to that class and to go to another teacher's room for extra help. Those who stay unstamped must work on academic work individually or with the permission of the teacher in small groups. So students go to one place, and about 5 minutes later, they're able to maneuver to another teacher if they have a stamp. Here's the situation. At the start of an advisory period, the teacher needs to take attendance, check every student's agenda to make sure that if they have a stamp, they have to leave, they can't hide in your class, and that they don't leave without a stamp. Students who are going to a different classroom need to be signed out. So if anyone from the front office is looking for them, you could tell exactly what classroom they are. And you also have to show the announcements during that first 5 minutes. There's a lot of things to do in 5 minute span. First thing was reflecting on all the different aspects that were needed. So you need to have a procedure for attendance, sign out, checking agendas, and announcements. From there, what procedures did you need to put into place for this class? Here's the procedures that Mr. Blakely ended up using. Each group had a clipboard with a sign in and out form. Students know where the clipboards are located to pick up on their own, because from the previous class leaving, Students had to know how to get those clipboards out. And usually the first students that were typically there learned the procedure on how to get those onto the different groups. Students sit in their assigned seats to make taking attendance fast and easy. Students have their agendas on their desk open to the date to check, so the teacher can quickly move around the room, check the agenda versus the sign-out sheet while announcements play. So just visualizing what this looks all together. Students come in, they have to sit in assigned seats, at least for that beginning of class. So the teacher can very quickly look to see who's not there and do attendance, taking a couple of minutes. While the teacher's taking attendance, announcements have started, so they could be listening to them and watching them because we have video announcements. Also, if they're leaving, they had to take the sign-out sheet and they had to put their name on it. Then with the next couple of minutes, the teacher would go around to every group, check every single person's agenda to see, are you staying or are you going? And make sure that the sign-out sheet matches who's staying and who's not. Students were directed to have the agendas open ahead of time so that the teacher can quickly go around and check that. Teaching. How do you think Mr. Blakely taught these procedures to his students? In general, it was laying out the expectations early on. And at our school, the first couple of weeks, students can't travel because there's a lot of beginning of the year stuff they have to do with their advisory teachers. But during those couple of weeks, make sure that students know the procedures and that every student knows where I would keep those clipboards. It was on a shelf in the back of the class. So if you were one of the first students into the class, you went and you put the proper clipboard on each desk or each group of desks. Doing it, the one thing that I usually have to remind students about is to have their agendas out and turn to the page, but gave reminders for a couple of weeks. And then after a while, asked them about what the procedure was, and they had group mates that could answer that. And then refining. How can you think of something that Mr. Blakely may want to change to make his procedure even smoother? Thinking back to how I refined with my last year in the classroom before going into a coaching role, is I started to make that sign-out sheet as an electric document. So I shared the link. That link was good all semester. So if you were leaving, you had to sign out on the electric document. And then I could go around and check agendas to see who's actually leaving my classroom. I will say, if I was going to go back, I might go back to the original pen and paper one, because the one thing I couldn't do with the electronic one was really check to see if they had if the students who had been stamped out from that group completed that form. And I didn't find a fast way of doing that. Now, as let's say the office needed to find a student when I had the clipboards, let's say they called and they asked for a student. I'm just going to say the name of Eric. I'd be like, well, Eric's in group 4. I'd ask, hey, those students sitting in group 4, can you look at that paper and tell me what room Eric's in? They'd tell me the teacher or the room number, and I would relay that information. When I did it electronically, I had to open up the document electronically and see where they went. And if they filled it out properly, then I had that information. All right. I'm not saying the electronic version was bad. I just had an easier time checking to make sure that the names on the list matched the names who had advisory stamps when it was right in front of me, group to group. We're going to do a 21-word summary where in exactly 21 words, I want you to summarize what you learned in this professional development. Here's my example. Procedures are the normal actions you train your class to do. You should reflect, plan, teach, and refine when making procedures. Sometimes you stimulate your brain if you decide the exact word count before you do it, because it makes you try to think about what do I need to convey and how can I do it as concise as possible. Here is the QR code for the evaluation. Please make sure that you do that one for me. I appreciate the feedback of how we can make things better. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for hundreds of free professional development videos to support teachers, students, and administrators. This is a free resource. Please take advantage and subscribe now. Please navigate to canyonpd.com. This is a one-stop shop for all the Canyon PD K-12 educational research has to offer. You will find information about our customized professional development, as well as our PD on demand, Canyon PD solutions to go, low cost, and individually tailored professional development. Connect with Canyon PD on social media, access free resources, interact with our team, and find out about upcoming events.